I'm recording my homily for the 28th Sunday in Ordinary Time in 2019. And I'm just building a little bit on a couple themes that I've had going on, and I didn't really plan them out this way, so I don't know if they make any sense, but they seem to build a little bit. So the first was with Lazarus and the rich man. You remember that a couple weeks ago, right? So Lazarus and the rich man. And I talked about the very nature of how Lazarus goes to heaven because he suffered. And so I wanted to, just the idea that there's this intrinsic necessity in our lives, if we're going to live a life of love, that there must be a willingness to suffer for the sake of others. There has to be, right? And the rich man does not go to heaven. He goes to hell because all he thinks about is comfort. That's all he wants is comfort. He wants his life to be easy. He wants to retire to the nice life, right? And so he goes to hell for it because he didn't do what he was supposed to do while here on earth. We're not here just to do whatever we want to do, right? There's a mission. Okay, and then last week I built on that, talking about the power of faith, that faith can move mountains when faith is real, when we actually really trust God. So with comfort, we don't need God. I don't need God because I can provide everything for myself, right? But where one is willing to sacrifice for the sake of others, one must live by faith in that, in following God in that, and not being able to be in control, right? Okay. So I'm going to build a little bit on that theme. And then I think there was another weekend in there where I talked about how one must be willing to do it 100%. One has to be willing to give 100%. All right. This week I want to tie in gratitude. Now, gratitude seems like it's a good, but it doesn't seem like it's like a huge thing, right? Because you know when you're at a restaurant and you see a family with kids, and the kid gets something, mom and dad say to the kid, "Now what do you say?" Right? And the kid says, "Oh, thank you," right? So we're teaching the children how to have gratitude. But I want to offer the thought that actually gratitude is really a central component of faith. Because if God provides for me in my life, I'm going to be grateful. If I really believe that in the heart of my hearts that God has provided for me, I'm going to be grateful. And so it's kind of like it's a symptom, or that's not the right word I'm looking for, but it's an expression that I know I'm on the right track when I have true gratitude. And when I don't, then it's a sign that I'm not on the right track, right? So the term that sometimes we use is that we become demanding consumers. We demand more and more and more, and give me. I had somebody just, this last weekend who was really upset that from their perspective, we had rejected his family, his children, because they wanted to have their grandchild baptized, and they were upset that we had rejected them. We hadn't rejected them, right? We just have some expectations of what it means for a couple to come and say they want to have their child baptized, and they didn't want that. It was just gimme. So, anyways, all right. I guess we're all like that sometimes. I'm like that too. Demanding consumers, which is the opposite of gratitude. Gratitude is a gift. It's a gift. I haven't earned it. I don't deserve it necessarily. It's just a gift, right? So, how often in our family. So I had a wedding on Saturday, and in my homily, I was talking to them and saying just how serious of a thing it is to be grateful for what we have. Because you think of marriages where marriages got all kinds of problems. They have forgotten that their spouse is a gift. Their spouse is a gift from God, that when they came together on that wedding day, God was giving them to each other as a gift. Our children, they're gifts, right? And I know when your child's a teenager and maybe making life a little bit difficult for you, we can forget that, but it's all gift. Every part of it is a gift. And for us, we look at our parents, was a time when after my dad had died and my mom was really struggling, and I forgot how much of a gift that she was, and my dad was, right? I had forgotten that. And because of that, it only made life that much harder for my mom. Because I had no gratitude. And that was a symptom of the fact that I wasn't really living by faith. I wasn't following God in that moment. I was trying to take, right? We have a couple things going on in our parish. Actually, before I get to that, I'm already off track. I'm sorry. I'm diverting in my homily. I'm going all over the place. So the gospel, right? So why am I talking about gratitude? Well, the gospel is these 10 lepers that come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, heal us. Please heal us. So he doesn't make a big deal out of it. He just says, go show yourself to the priest. And that's what they would have to do to prove that they have become clean. And while they're on their way, Jesus heals all 10 of them. All 10 of them were healed, right? And how many came back to thank him? One. 1 out of 10. 10%. You know, they give the latest statistics every year, every couple years, how many Catholics are actually going to Mass. And what does the word Mass, what does the word Eucharist mean? The word Eucharist means thanksgiving, right? So every Sunday, we're demonstrating that we are people of gratitude, that central event for us as disciples of Jesus is to give thanks, right? And so how many Catholics are actually coming to do that? Well, sometimes they'll say 20%, but that number is actually sometimes going down. It depends where you're at, and it's more like 10%. So it's kind of like the gospel. Only one came back to thank Jesus. Only one came back to give thanksgiving, to give the Eucharist, right? The word Eucharist, to give thanks. Only one. Well, we see that today at Mass. And I'm not saying that to like render judgment or to make us feel like we're above others because we go to Mass. It's just the nature of, without gratitude, we don't go back to Jesus. We don't go to Jesus. We don't need Jesus without gratitude. Even when he heals us, we feel like we don't need him. That's interesting what the other 9 were thinking. That is interesting, right? There's also a symbol in all of this, and I'm sure you've heard this before. It's like confession, right? So everybody who goes into confession, if they're sincere, they're forgiven of their sins, right? They're healed. So just like all 10, it's like this, all 10 were standing in line for confession, right? So to be healed of their spiritual leprosy. And Jesus heals all 10 of them. But then how many stay healed? How many really live by faith and then live the fullness of what Eucharist means? To be thankful and to be constantly coming back to Jesus. How many pray every day and really and sincerely are thankful for all the gifts in their life, for everything in their life? All right. So we've had two projects that we have going on. One is St. Anne's and one is St. Mary's. So St. Anne's our little mission, and so one of the projects is we're putting the bell. It's a great big huge bell. We're putting the bell back up in the bell tower. So I don't know how many years ago they took the bell out of the bell tower. The bell tower wasn't structurally adequate for the bell, and so they just took the bell out. I guess they felt like they didn't need the bell anymore. I don't know. Well, they kept the bell in all the parts, so now they want the bell back in. So we're putting the bell back in the bell tower. Well, the bell is this great big huge weight, right, that they're putting at the top of the tower. And not only that, but with the momentum and the momentum of the bell as it swings, the bell tower's got to be really strong. So we have to do all this retrofitting to make it strong. And I think in some ways it's kind of like it's an example of the church. The bell is like the weight of faith on the community, right? It's the weight of faith and it's the power of faith. And when the whole community is desiring to live by that faith, the community is strong enough to hold that weight of faith, right? And then powerful things happen because of it. And so like the bell, when it rings, you put it up in the tower so that the sound transmits across all around, and so that, we as Catholics, we like to annoy everybody with our bells. And so we let everybody know, it's like, hey, Mass time, it's Mass time, come on, right? And it's like we're letting people know, we're beckoning them back to Jesus. But the community has to be strong in order to carry that kind of faith, which echoes out into the community and then creates a deeper and a deeper sense of gratitude, which is thanksgiving. And we keep coming back then to Jesus. Every Sunday we come to Jesus. There's nothing more important than what we do on Sunday, right? We give thanks. The other project we have going on is St. Mary's. So our cemetery is right by, it's right on the corner of very busy streets, and people often are dumping trash in the cemetery because we have one section where there's no wall that separates it. It's just sidewalk right to the cemetery. Also people cutting through our property, and because we're on the corner. And so we're putting up this wall. We're putting up a wall and a fence right there by the cemetery. And so one of the things you do in putting up this wall is you put posts in the ground, right? And so you put these posts in the ground, and then you pour concrete in. And these posts go down pretty deep. They go down about 3 feet. So we're putting a lot of concrete in there. Well, you can imagine that when you get the post in the ground, you want to make sure that it's perfectly vertical, right? So you got to level, and so you check it on all sides, make sure, and you get it in. And so once you get it in, then you just go for lunch, right? And you can't go for lunch because you have to make sure that it stays vertical, because it's in wet concrete. The concrete's not going to hold it perfectly vertical. It's going to slowly tilt, right? Now you put braces on it. You can put braces on it, right? And that holds it. But we didn't use braces. We just would check it. We would check it every so often just to make sure. And actually, they stayed pretty consistent. They stayed pretty still. They didn't move around a whole lot. But we had to keep checking them. And also that they were the correct length apart, all those things. And I think this is like the next generation. It's like our children. We're setting our children, like the posts in the ground, we're setting them in the ground, and we're trying to make sure that they stay the way they need to stay so that they can be functional, so that they can be good and accomplish their purpose. Because what happens if you have a post, you stick the post in the wet concrete, we don't watch it, and it slowly slumps over. And then what does the concrete do? The concrete hardens, hard as rock, right? Well, our children, in some ways, as they grow up, the concrete, the foundation of which they base their lives on is kind of like the concrete, and it begins to harden. And we have to make sure that that post stays vertical, or else that post becomes useless. It will never accomplish what it's meant to do. Now, what happens when a post hardens and it's crooked? You have to dig it up. You have to start over. And I wonder, when we look at our church and we see the problems and struggles we're having in our church, when we lose a generation, it's like starting over. It's like the church has to rethink everything and do it all over again. Now, in some ways, I suppose there are blessings in that. It gives us a certain freedom to rethink everything, and I like doing that, recreating everything. In our confirmation program this year, confirmation and RCIA, we're doing something a little bit different. And so we're making as a requirement that the teenagers have to come into the church once a week, anytime basically, when the church is silent, and pray a holy hour. And we have little sheets that they fill out, little things that kind of help direct their meditation, and then they turn them in so we know that they're doing it, right? But just over the last couple days, we have 130, 150, probably about 160, am I doing my math right? Probably about 160 people that have to do this, between confirmation and RCIA. 160 people. And I was in the church last night and just seeing teenagers in there. And to me, look, they're praying. And they're just there in quiet and silence. And what I feel is, it's like, I hope we're training them, kind of like the post in the ground, we're training them to be like the one leper who was healed and came back to Jesus. Jesus is the concrete for them. Jesus is everything that they desire in their life, their purpose, right? And so you can see that in that quiet prayer, just that closeness forming. At least that's my hope. Pope Benedict said that the Catholic Church is going to have to get smaller before it gets bigger. I believe he's a realist on that. I think that's not the ideal, but I do think he's a realist, and I think that's probably true. We're going to have to get a little smaller before we get a little bigger, because it's like we have to be reminded of how to become that one and not be like the 9. I was talking to somebody the other day, and Pope Francis, he takes a little bit of a different take, and I think it's worth mentioning. He takes a little bit of a different take than Pope Benedict. Pope Francis, I think with him, he takes out his hammer and he starts pounding on the post when it goes crooked, right? And he wants to straighten it. And so he keeps talking about the church as being this field hospital. And so the field hospital, the people coming in mortally wounded, and we're there to heal them. And I think that's very true also, right? We have confession. There's true, sincere healing in that. There's powerful healing in that. And so it's not that we give up hope necessarily on anybody, right? I was talking to somebody the other day about just the transition between the Jewish faith and the Christian faith. And so you have the old covenants that God placed with the Jewish people, and then Jesus comes along and forms this new covenant, and you have this transition then into Christianity. And it's just beautiful how it all works, how it flows. It's beautiful how you see everything fulfilled into that new covenant in Jesus Christ. But in the midst of that, there's always some people who will try to bring hatred and division, right? And so they will try to create this animosity and hatred between the Christians and the Jewish people. And we've seen that at different points throughout history. Hitler was really, really good at that. I mean, he was kind of a fool in a lot of ways, but in this he was very savvy. And so he knew how to manipulate the Lutherans and the Catholics. In Germany, on some level, he knew how to manipulate them so that they would not recognize that connection, right? Now, if we honestly believe that our faith goes back all the way to the beginning of time, you can't help but be overwhelmed by just gratitude for everything God has done. From the beginning, everything He has done. But if somebody comes in and inserts hatred into that process of things that God has done, then it ruins it all, and we're not going to be grateful. The evil things that some priests have done in the sex abuse scandal, I think, is a perfect example. It's hard to be grateful for the gift that comes to us, and especially priests are the ones who are often central to bringing that gift to us, the sacraments and all those things. And it's truly sad to see that happen, right? Maybe those 9 lepers who were healed at some point encountered somebody along the way and said, "Don't go back and thank him, he's Jew. He's a Jewish man. We're Samaritans. We don't like the Jewish people." And so they didn't. Right? But there was the one. There was the one. So, we try to be the one, to have Thanksgiving in our hearts. All right? God bless. I'll see you next week.